Thank you so much for having me today. This is one of my favorite parts of my job, where I get to go out and talk about basically all of the issues having to do with cannabis in our society. A little bit about what we do at Cannacraft, why we do it, and then where we are in the development of cannabis policy in the county, in the cities that are located in the county, and then at the state level, and then at the federal level. And then a little bit about some basic concepts regarding cannabinoid medicine and why it's important. So let's get started. So I work for Cannacraft. Cannacraft is a cannabis manufacturing and distribution company that exists off of Corporate Center Drive in Santa Rosa. We have about 50,000 square feet of facilities in Santa Rosa that are housed in 4 different buildings, and some are zoned in a business park, and some are zoned in an industrial area. We can talk a little bit about why that is if you're interested in land use questions. What you see over here, this is a CO2 extractor. And this is what our business was based on. Our founders realized approximately 2013 that when cannabis was processed, that what was happening is we were cutting off parts of the leaves so that the flower remained. And what was left in those leaves actually had value. And that there were cannabinoids and terpenes, which are the active ingredients in cannabis, that were located in these leaves. And what we could do is we could use essentially the same technology where one decaffeinates coffee, and we can extract the cannabinoids from the leaf material. And then we can reformulate them into different products for different reasons. So these are some of the brands, some of which you may be familiar with, or if not, that's fine. Care by Design is one of our flagship brands, and that's basically high CBD medicine that we produce from cannabis. Satori is our edible line. ADX is the lifestyle line. Hi-Fi Hops is the partnership that we have with the Lagunitas Brewery, and they sell us hop water, and then we infuse it with an emulsion that's made out of cannabinoids. And then Loud and Clear is something called the distillate line, which we take the oil that comes out of the extractor, and then we send it through a process that is very much like petroleum refinement, and we refine the oil. In fact, our equipment comes from Germany and is the identical equipment that is used in petroleum refinement. So we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just using a different raw material. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, more about that as well. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a little bit of a basic understanding that the endocannabinoid system is part of all the other systems in the body. So we all have a lymphatic system and a cardiovascular system and a circulatory system. We also have an endocannabinoid system. And because there has been over time so few opportunities for research in the United States and basically worldwide because of cannabis prohibition, then it's been very difficult for us to talk about the endocannabinoid system, what it does, and how to fuel it. And so most doctors even have not even heard of the endocannabinoid system. In fact, in medical schools right now, they spend about 15 minutes on it. Okay, which is unfortunate because the endocannabinoid system does things that we don't normally think about but are really important. So, what is the endocannabinoid system? It is the body's regulator. What does that mean? Well, it's responsible for determining when you eat, when you sleep, how you sleep, what to forget, which we'll come back to in a minute, how to protect your body, and then how to relax. So let's go back to sleep for just a minute. There are a lot of people who can't sleep. So what do? They take a sleep aid. The problem with the sleep aid is it prevents your body from producing its own GABA. And GABA is what is telling your body to sleep when it needs to sleep. Cannabis doesn't replace the GABA. It doesn't replace the sleep aid. What it does is it teaches your body how to produce its own GABA again. So that's kind of the principle of cannabinoid medicine. So if it's protecting the body, it's teaching the immune system how to produce the T cells that are fighting the disease. It's not fighting the disease itself. So the endocannabinoid system really needs a lot more research. The difficulties of the endocannabinoid system is that it operates differently in every human. And so there's no set way that anybody can tell anybody, if you take this, it will have this effect on you. Okay, that does not exist in cannabinoid medicine. It also doesn't exist as much as we'd like to in pharmaceutical medicine, but it is important to recognize that in cannabis medicine, people need to do a lot of trial and error with this. The good thing is that no matter what people try with cannabinoid medicine, is that it can't hurt them. Okay? The statistics that I've heard is one would have to smoke 50,000 pounds in a half an hour in order to have a fatal overdose, or 173,000 joints in 10 minutes. Okay, so that is physically impossible. So one cannot hurt oneself, with a few exceptions. If one is on, and I'm not giving medical advice, but I want to caution people that if one is on a pharmaceutical that is contraindicated with grapefruit juice, then they really need to be under doctor's care if they're starting cannabinoid medicine. It's not something that one should do on their own. Okay, if they're taking something that's contraindicated with grapefruit juice. So I just want to make that disclaimer. Let's talk about forgetting just for a second. Why would I want to forget? Well, if I have knee pain, I want to forget. If I'm a 16-year-old walking into advanced algebra, I do not want to forget. Okay, and this is some of the problems with cannabinoid medicine, is that we have to be really careful. The 16-year-old that's seeking out cannabinoids might not be doing the wrong thing, but they are seeking out the wrong profile. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, there are lots of different cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. There are about 75 of them. The two that you hear about very often are CBD or THC. THC has a psychoactive effect. CBD mitigates the psychoactive effect. The two used in conjunction with one another are most effective. A CBD isolate is about 4 times less effective than CBD with a little bit of THC in it. The good thing is that the CBD makes it so you don't feel the THC, depending upon how much. I brought these little pamphlets that will teach you about CBD and THC and their interrelationship and what generally one can expect, but again, everybody's body is different. So I do want to jump ahead because I know we are on a time crunch. Okay, so these are some of the ways that people use cannabinoid medicine. So you can see different in the body, different in the mind. So it depends upon the profile. One of the things that I usually say is you might be familiar with the term terpene, you might not, but essentially a terpene is an essential oil, and it appears naturally with the cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. When one ingests cannabis, whatever delivery system they're comfortable with, the terpenes and the cannabinoids interact with one another. It's called the entourage effect. And when they interact with one another, it has different generalized effects in the body. What we normally say is that cannabinoids are determining the intensity of the effect, and the terpenes are determining the type of effect. Is it making somebody sleepy or hungry or creative? So these are some of the ways in which people have been using cannabinoid medicine. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about Parkinson's and epilepsy in a minute, but I want to go over a little history. How did we get to where we are now? Well, the Chinese have been using cannabinoid medicine for thousands of years. In about 1837, William O'Shaughnessy was the physician who introduced cannabinoid medicine to the West, and it took off pretty quickly. And in 1900, one would have found sugar in the pharmaceutical aisle, but cannabis in the regular grocery aisle. It was a pretty common over-the-counter home remedy, so to speak, that people use for a lot of different things. By 1937, we get the Marijuana Tax Act. And As a result of this, what happened is we took cannabinoids out of the society. Okay, we didn't feed them to our livestock anymore. We didn't allow people to grow them essentially in their farms. We didn't allow people to ingest them anymore. And as a result of that, the research just shut down. Just as a side note, the American Medical Association absolutely begged the United States Congress not to pass the Marijuana Tax Act, because they said that they had no way of replicating the place that cannabis medicine held in the pharmacopoeia. It was just a natural thing that doctors did. It's like, start with the cannabis, because what it's doing, they didn't know how, they didn't know why, but it was re-regulating the systems of the body and helping the body do what it was intended to do. By 1964, an Israeli doctor, he isolated the THC molecule, and then we started to do more research, not really in the United States, but in other places. And by 1970, cannabis was actually, we went in the wrong direction. We added it to the Controlled Substances Act, and they classified it as a Schedule I drug, okay, saying it had no medical value and had highly addictive tendencies. Absolutely not true on both cases. It's more of a political thing that we ended up with that than anything else. The problem then became we can't research. And so what ended up happening is that we started to develop all this anecdotal evidence of things, of diseases that were helped by cannabis, and we eventually, and I'm going to jump ahead to 1996, passed the Compassionate Use Act in California. This was mainly as a result of the AIDS epidemic, and a lot of people had something called wasting syndrome, and cannabis was helping them ingest food, be hungry, and keep it down. And so it seemed like, from a compassionate standpoint, that people who were dying should have access to the medicine that was making them feel better. And so we passed the the Compassionate Use Act. It was an initiative in California. This is a side note, there are some problems with actually creating public policy by initiative. The initiative did, in fact, instruct the state legislature to develop a regulatory schema for cannabis in California. They didn't. They waited 18 years, and then after Colorado went adult use, they realized that the handwriting was on the wall, that California would eventually go adult use, and they had to come up with some type of regulatory structure whereby the products could be taxed, sold, and tested, so that the consumer is safe. So this is where we find ourselves now. We had the what was then the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, MRSA, which passed in 2015, and then we go into an implementation period where both localities and the state level has to figure out how businesses are going to be permitted and licensed, and then move forward, making sure that the product is tested and taxed so it can be sold in California. It's a complicated process. I think that that's an understatement. It's a complicated process, but there are some benefits to new regulations. One of the most important benefits is I am not afraid of being arrested just by going to work. Okay, which I think is a really important thing. Also, consumers can expect tested, safe product. Cannabis is the safest, from the standpoint of pesticides and heavy metals and other contaminants, is absolutely the safest consumer product on the market. We are tested at parts per billion. We are not tested at parts per million. We're tested at the batch level, not at the soil level or at the farm level. It is enormously challenging to grow clean cannabis and to produce clean product because of the stringent testing requirements. Also, we're getting different types of people in the cannabis workplace. They're more serious, they're more educated, it's a benefit to everyone. In fact, our CEO comes to us from Sonoma State. He was the dean, Bill Silver was the dean of business and economics at Sonoma State, and then decided to become our CEO. We're happy to have him. Cannabis companies were also able to contribute in a more robust way to the society. It's really challenging when we know that we're in a healthcare situation and we would like to give money to healthcare organizations, and they feel as if they cannot take our money because of the raw material with which we work. So now that it is a legal product, we get to participate, and we're happy to do so. And there are some challenges, though, to the new regulations. Maybe some things that we didn't do as well as we would have liked. We did layer a voter initiative, an adult use voter initiative, on top of the regulatory schema that was put forth by the state legislature and signed by the governor. That isn't the best way to create public policy, because there are incongruities between those two, and they're difficult to work out. So some of the things some of the challenges that we have. Number one, regulations and taxes make it very difficult for us to compete with the black market. The black market has a lot of products and brands that are familiar to people because we had so many years of no regulation at all. So if you have a brand that's familiar to people, it's hard for them to recognize whether or not it's a legal brand or an illegal brand. The other thing, and this is interesting when I speak to business groups, I always bring this up, and people tend to be relatively incensed by it, and that is we pay tax on our gross, not our net, and which is just, it's insane. We are really not able to turn the type of profit that we should be based on this fact. We cannot deduct our normal business expenses, only our cost of goods sold. So this is called Federal Rule 280E. We lobby heavily at the federal level to try and get rid of it, but it's a challenge. We also have to pay our taxes in cash, and as a result, we pay a 10% penalty in cash. So no matter what we do, it's very difficult. We would have loved to have seen an expansion of the California cannabis market as a result of regulation. We have not, and that's because of the aforementioned problems with regard to the brands that are out there that are still within the black market. California has something called a dual licensing structure, which in order to get a state license, one needs to have a local permit. Land use regulations in local jurisdictions make it challenging to get that local permit. And this is something that we see playing out in Sonoma County all the time. This is where I start talking about a tale of two jurisdictions. Santa Rosa decided that our raw material was irrelevant. They basically said, what are you doing and what are the analogous industries that we permit in Santa Rosa, and we'll treat you that way. Sonoma County did not do that. They basically said your raw material is paramount to any discussion that we're going to be having, and we're not sure that we want your raw material. So Santa Rosa is literally known the worldwide as a way to do responsible, reasonable cannabis regulations. Sonoma County, we have, I think, one functioning outdoor permitted farm. All the others are operating in penalty relief and are sitting in the CUP process. But this is not unique to cannabis. I mean, I've lived in Sonoma County about 32 years, which makes me a newcomer in this room. However, I can tell you that everyone has problems with permits, Sonoma or PRMD. This is a function of business and doing business in Sonoma County, not necessarily doing cannabis business in Sonoma County. It's just slightly more challenging for us. So we cannot export our product across state lines. We can't move it. So when we can, we'll start to see the differentiation of North Coast cannabis, and we'll be able to create things like cannabis appellations, which are similar to wine appellations, but are slightly more robust. So if anybody's interested in that, please feel free to ask me a question. That's one of my favorite topics in this process, is actually using the appellations language to promote that which we produce in Sonoma County and in Mendocino County and in the Emerald Triangle. There's also some pretty significant confusion that we have going on about hemp regulation, and I want to take a little bit of time and talk about that, but I'm going to wait in just a second and talk about child-resistant packaging. And that brings up a big word. It's called decarboxylation. Decarboxylation is the process by which one heats the cannabis to make it available to the body. Okay, that's why people smoke it or put it in a vaporizer. One of the things, and then if we make drops and gel caps at Cannacraft, and those are decarboxylated. Edibles are decarboxylated to make them available. The raw plant can't hurt anybody. So if we see any flour, a child could take a bath in 17 pounds of flour. They're just going to get sticky. They're not going to get high. Okay, so why we put flour in child-resistant packaging, I don't know. But it is important. The reason is because the child-resistant packaging has enormous amounts of plastics that are associated with it. And I think we really need to be cognizant of the plastics. We just got our vape cartridges child-resistant certified in and of themselves. And as a result, we were able to remove about 220,000 pieces of plastic from the environment per month. Yeah, so we spent the time, energy, and effort to do that. Not everybody is doing that. My concern is that we are able to reduce the child-resistant packaging. For edibles, I get it. I completely get it. For flour, not so much. You know, it's so. But I do want to go back to hemp and cannabis because some of this may surprise you. This is cannabis for fiber, which is the actual definition of hemp. I want to show you how it's grown. You can kind of see. I'd say this is about, I don't know, this guy's probably 6 feet. I don't know, what would you say? Yeah, it's pretty tall, huh? This is grown for fiber. This is grown for biomass. This is the product that one can use to make things like hempcrete, okay, which is a building material. One can make paper out of this, or clothing, or anything. It's not for human consumption. This is cannabis for medicine. Okay, so the plants are being grown very far apart. They're also only female plants. Okay, the female plants are without seed. So these plants can get really, really big and really, really bushy, but they're not grown the same way. They're grown much further apart. Okay? Here's the problem, and that gets into the definitions. And this is important in Sonoma County because a few weeks ago, Sonoma County Board of Supervisors issued a hemp moratorium in Sonoma County because we don't know how to handle this problem. The federal government has a very special definition of hemp. Why do we need a special definition? Because hemp and cannabis are the same plant. When we're talking about botany, they're exactly the same plant. The difference, according to the federal government, is the level of THC in the plant. So we are basing right now a whole regulatory system and a whole testing system and we're basing everything on THC level. Okay. That is very difficult to determine what's cannabis and what's hemp, because this could be cannabis, it also could be hemp. Nobody knows until the plant matures, a sample is taken, it goes to a lab, it's tested, and then we'll know. I surmise that this is not going to work from a regulatory standpoint. Law enforcement is going to drive down the road and they're going to see a field. It's going to look like this, and they're going to say, is it cannabis or hemp? And there's no way of knowing. It has all of the same negative externalities when we talk about potential neighborhood impacts like odor, except according to the federal government, hemp is legal and cannabis is not. Like, we can't tell the difference. So in the long run, what we're hoping for is that the federal government will decide that it's either grown for biomass, in which case there's a certain land use zoning classification associated with it at the local level, and you can tell the difference. And then if it's grown for human consumption, we can make sure that we have the same testing standards so that they're equally safe. I will say honestly, not because I'm not promoting my company here, but I'm concerned that there's a lot of hemp-derived CBD products on the market that aren't tested. We tested about 20 different brands at our facility, and we found about a third, and a third. A third had no CBD in it at all, but there's no regulation making sure that it would. About another third didn't meet the label claim, which means that the label said there was 10 milligrams and there was only 3. And then the other third had way too high pesticide levels and heavy metal levels. And since there's no regulation and there's no regulatory authority and there's nobody watching, that really concerns me. Okay? So I think that we're going to have to come to some sort of agreement as a society about our definitions so that we can make sure we can protect the consumer. So from a consumer protection standpoint, this differentiation is really important. How is this going to play out in Sonoma County? Well, as far as once we get to next year, okay, presumably the local, the Board of Supervisors will have some sort of regulation or regulatory package that they will ask the Ag Commissioner to implement. It is totally different than cannabis. Even though it's exactly the same plant, we're not going to be able to tell the difference. It's going to be property line to property line, no setbacks, and right to farm on ag land, okay? Because that is what the state law and the federal law says. So unless we lobby appropriately at the federal government for consumer protection, this could be really complicated and really confusing for local regulators and for law enforcement. And also, from a consumer protection standpoint, it definitely concerns me. So I wanted to make sure to give you an opportunity to understand some of what's going on in the county. So what's next? So we're going to have to do a lot of education over the next 10 years about the endocannabinoid system and about people using cannabinoid medicine, especially in conjunction with other pharmaceuticals. One of the things I might draw your attention to is a website. It's our affiliated nonprofit called Project CBD. And one of the things I really like about projectcbd.org is it gives you access to all of the studies that are out there. Somebody says, oh, there are not scientific studies. There are many. And so if you want to read that, that would be a good resource. We're going to see this continued adjustment period. And it's not always going to be pleasant because it's a new world in that regard. We're going to start seeing also increased research into using cannabinoid medicine for opioid reduction. In 2017, approximately 70,000 people died of opioid overdoses. And what we're finding is, without even trying, in states that have legal adult use, we're seeing about 25% reduction in opioid fatalities. And so if we actually started trying, we might see something really profound. Oftentimes people say that cannabis is a gateway drug. It's actually an exit drug in this regard. People are looking for pain control, and this can work. We're also going to see over the next couple of years, we're going to see changes in federal law regarding cannabis prohibition, and we're going to see more access to banking. I am paid in cash. I would rather not be. All the withholding is done, but it does give me limited access to something like a 401k or a health savings account. I would like to be a fully fledged member of society. So we're going to start seeing that. The other thing is, I think we should really think about, cannabis gives us the opportunity to really look at land use in a way that is diversified. What can we do? Because cannabis is a high cash crop. What can we do to incentivize health of local food sheds, incentivize farmer viability? There's a bill coming through for those of you who are farmers and have history in farming communities. There's a bill coming through the legislature that would allow cannabis to be an approved use without negating a Williamson Act contract. So we're going to start seeing changes. And the last thing is I want, there's that issue about cannabis and hemp and making sure that, that we have proper definitions. But I do want to open this up to questions if you have any. And I also brought some of these, so please feel free to take one on your way out. So, but feel free to ask me any questions. Go right ahead.
Do you feel like the power and the scope of the pharmaceutical industry as it is right now is a hugely influential factor in this limitation for the cannabis industry?
To a certain extent, yes, and to a certain extent, no. And I think that we do something that's very different. Generally, when people are prescribed a pharmaceutical, if they're prescribed at a particular dosage that is most likely to work for that person based on very specific studies, and to go either above or below that dosage, the assumption is one is either above or below the therapeutic effect. Since cannabinoid medicine doesn't work that way and it's based on trial and error, I think what it gives us an opportunity to, just as consumers of pharmaceuticals, to maybe write some more things down, maybe ask some more questions, maybe take some of the lessons from cannabinoid medicine and apply it to pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals, because they're dealing with patented molecules, they're dealing with isolates. And in general, cannabis is not designed to be an isolate. So when we're talking about, there's a really good example which you may be familiar with, and Lipitor is a pretty popular cholesterol reduction drug. Lipitor is the isolate of red yeast rice, which you can buy at the Whole Foods. So the active ingredient in red yeast rice is Lipitor. So there are examples of isolates and whole plant medicine existing concurrently, let's put it that way. One of the things that we found is that the CBD isolate, which is Epidiolex, and the THC isolate, which is Marinol, are not nearly as effective as those that are the compounds being used in conjunction with one another. Marinol tends to make people shaky, and Epidiolex tends to lose its efficacy over time. So, we just need to do more research and figure it out over. When cannabis, hemp, is grown for oil, which means that we're growing the flower, it has a terpene profile that does smell, yes. Some people like the smell, some people do not like the smell. I think it smells better than the traditional Sonoma aroma, but I could see how, I can see how living next to a cannabis facility might be a problem. As is living next to a pig farm or it's one of the things, in Sonoma County, one of the things we have is we have right to farm. And the right to farm ordinance, basically, people accept that when they move into agricultural areas that they are going to experience agricultural nuisances. And it's difficult. And we have to balance this out. But yes, I'm not going to say there are not negative externalities. Do they bother me? No. Are they going to bother other people? Yes.
One more question, then we're going to have to wrap it up.
So, when I read about the myriad of problems people claim to have fixed, to me it starts sounding like Dr. Seuss snake oil. So, are there actual well thought out statistics that prove that it can do some of these things, and what percentage statistically they actually help?
I would draw you to look at some of the studies on projectcbd.org. The problem with those statistics is everyone is different. And we don't really have access to very many of the cannabinoid profiles that are going to work for different people. It could take a lot of trial and error to find that. There are some children who have epilepsy who are helped by a CBD product. There are some children who have epilepsy who, from the CBD, the high CBD product, the high ratio CBD to THC, doesn't work for them at all. The little girl in Santa Rosa who wanted to go to kindergarten, but needs cannabinoid medicine, she takes between 500 and 600 milligrams of THC a day. I'd be down for a week if I were to take that. But her body is metabolizing those cannabinoids and using them. So she could have exactly the same disease as somebody else, and yet in her body she needs a different dosage. So it really is a very difficult question that you're asking. And so can we say, do cannabinoids kill cancer? In a test tube, yes. In a body, they can. For everyone, no. So it's a very difficult question that you're asking, because there is no set answer. Are there studies out there to say cannabis can work for Parkinson's? Yes. Is it going to work for everyone who has Parkinson's? And the answer is no. And there's no rhyme or reason to that, and there's no way of telling.
Well, okay, thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And I have a Bluetooth speaker for the speaker, so thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you again. Good show. Okay, everyone, that's it for today. So remember, next week we will not be here, but we'll be at the Coast Guard, provided you've got all the necessary paperwork. So until then, have a great week, and thanks for coming. Good day.